Welcome to Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go. This audio uses AI narration to present our original book analysis. Buckle up for a deep dive into the wild story of Patricia Hearst, from American heiress to Symbionese Liberation Army member, bank robber, fugitive, and then a convicted felon who ends up pardoned by the president. It's quite the story.
Absolutely.
We're going through Jeffrey Toobin's American Heiress to try to figure out how this all happened and what it says about America in the 1970s.
Well, to really get Patricia's transformation, you need to understand what was going on back then.
Yeah, Toobin really paints a picture of that time, the 1970s. The optimism of the 60s was gone. You had this economic stagnation, the Watergate scandal, a real feeling of disillusionment.
And especially in San Francisco, there was this undercurrent of fear. The Zodiac killer was still out there. Then you have the zebra murders, all these racially motivated killings targeting white people. It all added to the anxiety of the city.
So this unrest is simmering, and then you have the Symbionese Liberation Army, or SLA for short, bursting onto the scene.
Right. They saw themselves as revolutionaries, wanting to overthrow the U.S. government, using armed struggle, but their ideology was all over the place. A lot of revolutionary talk that often got lost in their own dysfunction and desire for attention.
Before we get into all that, let's take a step back. Who was Patricia Hearst before all this happened?
Well, she came from privilege, elite schools like Crystal Springs for girls, but under that wealthy upbringing, there was this rebellious streak, kind of like her great-grandmother, Phoebe Apperson Hearst, a strong-willed woman known for going against the grain.
Toobin mentioned something interesting about Patricia's engagement to Stephen Weed. Instead of a ring, he gave her moccasins, with a note that just said ring. Which kind of says a lot about their relationship.
It does, doesn't it? And it foreshadows the issues that came up during and after the kidnapping. A lot of scrutiny on Weed's actions later on.
Right, and speaking of the kidnapping, Toobin goes into detail about that night on Benvenue Avenue.
Chaos, multiple cars, gunfire. It showed right away that the SLA was not afraid to use violence to get what they wanted. They threw Patricia in a car trunk, leaving her completely disoriented and terrified.
And this is where we meet the main players in the SLA. You have Donald DeFreeze, a.k.a. Sink, the charismatic but unstable leader. Then there's Patricia Soltysik, or Ms. Moon, dedicated to the cause but with a troubled past. And then Nancy Ling Perry, a writer, who fully embraced poverty to further their goals.
The relationships between them were complicated. Personal grudges and conflicting personalities often got in the way of their supposed ideology. That internal mess really shaped Patricia's experience in the group.
Yeah, Toobin doesn't hold back on the details of her captivity. Blindfolded, locked in a closet, constantly under threat.
And then they gave her a shotgun. It was a mind game, a way to break her down, to blur the line between hostage and potential recruit. That psychological manipulation on top of the trauma of the kidnapping started to wear her down.
And then there's Willie Wolf, a.k.a. Cujo, seen as the most sympathetic of her captors.
Right. He tries to teach her about the SLA's ideology, but whether she actually believed it or just went along with it to survive, well, that's up for debate. But his impact on her is clear.
And then comes the shocker. Patricia, now calling herself Tanya, is part of the Hibernia bank robbery, wielding a machine gun. This image, broadcast everywhere, shocked the whole country.
It makes you wonder, was it a real change of heart? Stockholm syndrome? Or just pure survival instinct? Toobin looks at all the possibilities, lays out the evidence, but it's still one of the big mysteries of this case. The SLA wasn't just about taking control, though. It was about breaking Patricia down.
That's a good point. And then you have the shooting at Mel's. She sees the police brutality firsthand. Her comrades are killed.
Wow. Just imagine what that would do to you psychologically. That's a real turning point in the story.
And then life on the run. It's this strange mix of revolutionary fervor and, everyday stuff. Robbing banks one day, attending feminist study groups the next.
Bizarre. They made these odd alliances, too, like that time with Jack Scott, the sports writer who was fascinated by radical groups. Patricia's world had become something else entirely.
Toobin doesn't just stick to the events, though. He digs into the tensions within the SLA, the bombing campaign that went so wrong, and Patricia's relationship with Steve Celaya, all these things that led to the group falling apart.
You could see the cracks forming, and the authorities were closing in.
Yeah. Toobin describes how a tip from Jack Scott's brother leads to Bill and Emily Heiress getting arrested. That sets the stage for the raid on Patricia's apartment.
The end of their run.
The trial was a media circus, F. Lee Bailey using that brainwashing defense.
A bold move, really, playing on people's fears about mind control, raising all these questions about free will and responsibility.
In the end, the jury wasn't convinced. Patricia is convicted. Toobin talks about the mixed reactions from the public, the eventual pardon from the president, and all the questions that linger.
Was she a victim? Was she in on it? People still debate that today. The book doesn't give easy answers, which is what makes it so interesting.
Absolutely. Toobin also looks at how the media covered the case and how that might have swayed public opinion, maybe even the trial itself.
This was a time when television was really gaining power. And the Hearst case played out for everyone to see, feeding the public's fascination.
So if we take a step back, what can we learn from this whole story?
It goes beyond true crime. It gives us a glimpse into a really turbulent time in America. It makes you think about human nature, about how seductive but dangerous ideologies can be.
It makes us question our own ideas about justice, about choices, and the power of narratives to shape how we see things. It's kind of crazy when you think about what happened to Patricia and then what happened to the other SLA members.
Yeah, they had these big plans to, I don't know, change the world or whatever, but it all fell apart. Some died in that shootout. Others spent years running or in prison.
A real reminder of how dangerous those radical ideas can be, especially when it turns into violence. And then you have Patricia. She does her time, and then it seems like she builds a pretty normal life. Marriage, kids, almost like finding some peace after everything she went through.
It really makes you think about how resilient people can be and about the lasting effects of trauma. Can you ever really find peace after something that intense?
It's hard to say.
Yeah.
The story also shows how those events from the past, they still have an impact on individual lives, on how we talk about things as a society.
Definitely.
Toobin doesn't shy away from the tough questions either, about Patricia's role in all of it, the choices she made, and if she really deserved that.
Pardon? Yeah, he wants us to really grapple with it all, to see it from different angles, not just jump to easy conclusions.
So, for anyone listening, what are the big takeaways from American Heiress?
This is more than just a true crime story. It's a look into a really messy part of American history, a reflection on how complicated people are, and a warning about how tempting those radical ideas can be, but also how dangerous.
It asks us to challenge what we think we know, to face some uncomfortable truths, and to think about how the past is still shaping our world today.
Exactly.
American Heiress will really get you thinking. We definitely suggest checking it out. You can find a link in the show notes.
It's one of those books that stays with you.
And while you're at it, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. That way you won't miss our next deep dive into another fascinating story. We'll be back to explore more ideas, one story at a time,